The storm was already winning. A 6-year-old girl collapsed in the freezing wind outside a gated estate on the edge of the city. Snow clung to her hair, her lips turning blue, her small hands shaking so badly. She could no longer stand. No one was supposed to see her there, no one was supposed to be watching. But when the gates finally opened and a powerful man knelt in the snow, beside her she whispered 6 words that would shatter his world. "Sir, my mom never came home." What he discovered while searching for her mother would expose a truth he had ignored his entire life, a truth hidden behind success, money, and closed doors. And what happened next did not just change one life, it changed all 3 of them forever. If stories like this matter to you, stories about kindness, courage, and the people the world forgets, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It truly means more than you know, and it helps these stories reach the people who need them most. Stay with me because one frozen morning became the warmest moment any of them had ever known. The storm had already claimed the city long before anyone realized how dangerous it had become. Wind tore through the streets with a force that stole breath from lungs and courage from hearts. Snow fell sideways, sharp and relentless, coating everything it touched in a blinding white. At the far edge of the city, where the lights thinned and silence grew heavier, a small body gave in to the cold. A 6-year-old girl collapsed outside the iron gates of a massive estate, her knees sinking into the snow, as if the ground itself were pulling her under. Snow clung to her hair, melting and refreezing in tangled curls. Her lips had lost their color, turning a faint shade of blue, and her hands shook so violently she could no longer push herself up. Every breath came shallow and uneven, fogging the air in front of her face before disappearing into the storm. No one was meant to see her there. No one was supposed to be watching. She was just another quiet casualty of a morning that had gone wrong. Then the gate moved. Metal groaned as it slowly opened, cutting through the howl of the wind. Footsteps followed, fast and unsteady, crunching through the snow. A tall figure emerged from behind the gates and dropped to his knees beside her, without hesitation, his expensive coat darkened by snow, his hands bare against the cold. He had power, money, influence, a life carefully built behind walls like these. But none of that mattered as he leaned closer to the small girl, struggling to stay calm. Cheshi looked up at him, her eyes glassy and unfocused, and gathered the last of her strength. Her voice was barely more than a breath when she spoke 6 simple words that landed heavier than any storm. "Sir, my mom never came home." In that moment, something inside him broke open. What began as an act of rescue would soon become a reckoning. The search for her mother would uncover a truth he had spent years avoiding, a truth buried beneath profit margins, success stories, and locked doors. And what followed would not only save a life, it would change 3 of them forever. If stories like this matter to you, stay with me. One frozen morning would become the warmest moment any of them had ever known. Port Alder had never been built for snow. It was a coastal American city shaped by rain and wind, not ice and silence. Winters usually meant slick pavement, damp coats, and endless gray skies. People owned umbrellas, not snow shovels. Children learned how to jump puddles, not trudge through drifts. But that morning the city woke to something unfamiliar and unforgiving. One beat, the storm had arrived overnight without warning, swallowing streets, sidewalks, and doorways beneath thick layers of white. Traffic lights blinked uselessly over intersections filled with abandoned cars, frozen at odd angles as drivers fled on foot. Buses never came, trains were shut down, sirens echoed briefly, then vanished. Port Alder did not slow down. It stopped in the middle of all that stillness. A small figure moved. She was barely noticeable against the vast frozen streets dwarfed by buildings and buried cars. Her name was Maya. She was 6 years old, far too young to be outside in weather like this, far too small to be alone. She wore a green puffer jacket that had once been bright and cheerful, but years of careful washing had dulled its color. The zipper stuck halfway up and the sleeves were a little too long. Her sneakers were soaked through snow, seeping in with every step, until her socks froze stiff around her toes. Each step sent a sharp pain up her legs. Her feet burned, then went numb, then burned again. Her breath scraped against her chest and her arms felt heavy at her sides. Still, she kept moving. Maya had been walking since before sunrise. Not wandering, not playing, not chasing adventure. She was not lost. She was searching. Her eyes scanned every street, every doorway, every shadow, hoping to see a familiar shape, a familiar face. Somewhere in this frozen city was the one person she needed most. She was looking for her mother. Alina worked nights cleaning offices at a massive biomedical campus outside the city. By day, the buildings were full of life-bright labs, humming with machines, scientists, and researchers moving with purpose. By night, they fell silent, and that was when Alina arrived. She pushed her cart through long, echoing hallways, scrubbing floors until they shined, emptying heavy bins, wiping desks that would be used again in the morning by people who would never know. Her name? She worked quietly, efficiently, never complained. The job paid the bills. It kept their small apartment warm. It kept food on the table no matter how late her shift ended, no matter how tired her body felt. Alina always came home before Maya woke up, always. It was the one promise she never broke. She would slip inside while the city still slept, lean over Maya's bed, kiss her forehead, and whisper softly, "I'm here, baby." And every morning Maya woke up knowing she was not alone. But this morning was different. The apartment was silent. No footsteps in the hallway, no gentle voice from the kitchen, no warmth moving through the rooms, just cold air and long shadows. Maya sat up in bed and listened, holding her breath, hoping she had imagined it, but nothing came. She waited longer than she should have. Then she climbed out of bed, pulled on her jacket with shaking hands, packed her worn backpack and carefully placed her stuffed bear inside the one thing that made her feel brave. She opened the door and stepped outside, because if her mother was not coming home, Maya knew she had to go find her. Maya's mom, Alina, worked nights cleaning offices at a massive biomedical campus outside the city. She scrubbed floors, emptied bins, and wiped desks no one ever thanked her for. No matter how late her shift ended, Alina always came home before Maya woke up. Always. She would kiss Maya's forehead and whisper, "I'm here, baby." But this morning the apartment was silent. No footsteps, no voice, no warmth, just cold and waiting. So Maya put on her jacket, packed her worn backpack with her stuffed bear inside, and left. She checked the bus stop where her mom usually got off. The small shelter half buried in snow, the bench empty, no footprints nearby, no sign that anyone had been there all night. Maya stood there for a moment longer than she should have, hoping somehow her mother might appear if she waited, but nothing happened. So she turned and began walking toward the biomedical campus, the place where her mom worked. But with every block the snow grew deeper, clinging to her legs, slowing her down. The buildings farther away than she remembered. The distance suddenly impossible for someone so small. Her breath burned in her chest and her steps became uneven. Fear crept in quietly. Then she remembered something Alina had once told her during a long blackout when the apartment was dark and Maya had been scared. Her mother had held her close and said, "If you ever need help, baby, go to the big house by the cliffs. The man there helps people." Maya had never been there herself. She didn't know the man's name or what he looked like. But she knew the place. Everyone in Port Alder did. The house that sat high above the city where lights always stayed on. The one people talked about in whispers. And with nowhere else to go, Maya turned away from the campus and began moving toward the cliffs. She checked the bus stop where her mom usually got off. Nothing was there. She walked toward the campus, but the snow grew deeper and the distance felt too far. Then she remembered something Alina once told her during a blackout. "If you ever need help, baby, go to the big house by the cliffs. The man there helps people." Maya didn't know his name, but she knew the place. Everyone did. The estate sat high above the city, perched on the cliffs like it was watching everything below, surrounded by thick stone walls and tall iron gates that looked impossible to climb. People called it the Ridge House, a place everyone recognized, but few ever approached. By the time Maya finally reached the gates, her legs were burning so badly they barely felt like her own. Every step sent pain through her knees. The wind howled across the open ground and pushed against her small body, as if trying to force her back down the hill. She leaned forward and lifted her arm toward the intercom panel mounted beside the gate, knowing this was the place her mother had meant, but her fingers were stiff and numb. They wouldn't move no matter how hard she tried. The cold had settled too deep, her vision blurred. The ground tilted beneath her feet. The world began to spin slowly at first, then all at once. And before she could call out or take another step, her knees buckled and she collapsed into the snow. The estate sat high above the city, surrounded by stone walls and iron gates. People called it the Ridge House. By the time Maya reached the gates, her legs were burning and barely holding her up. The wind pushed her back with every step. She tried to press the intercom, but her fingers wouldn't move. The world spun around her, and then her knees buckled and she fell into the snow. A voice cut through the storm, sharp and urgent, carried by the wind like it didn't belong to the silence around them. "Someone's out there." The iron gates buzzed loudly and began to slide open. Breaking the stillness of the snow-covered estate, a man ran toward her without hesitation, his long coat flapping wildly behind him as he moved through the snow, his face tight with panic, eyes locked on the small shape collapsed near the gate. He reached her just in time, dropping to his knees and catching her before her body fully sank into the cold ground. He pulled her close against his chest, wrapping his coat around her small frame. "I've got you," he said, his voice low but steady. "You're safe now." His name was Thomas Hale, 43 years old, the founder of a healthcare logistics company that supplied hospitals across the country, a man known in business circles as successful, untouchable, even cold, someone who made decisions in boardrooms without blinking. But in that moment, holding a barely conscious child whose body felt far too light in his arms, something inside him cracked. Something he didn't even realize was still there. Inside the house, the warmth wrapped around them immediately, a sharp contrast to the freezing wind outside. Fire crackled loudly in a stone fireplace, casting soft light across the room. Thick blankets were brought quickly and layered over Maya's small body. Thomas knelt beside her on the floor as she held a mug of warm cocoa with trembling hands, taking careful sips like she was afraid it might disappear. He stayed close, keeping his voice calm and gentle, asking her what her name was. "Maya," she whispered, barely louder than the fire. "And your mom?" he asked softly. "Alina," Maya said, her voice breaking as tears filled her eyes. "She didn't come home." The words landed heavy in the room. Thomas stood and began making calls immediately. Voices on speakerphones, names being searched, records pulled, timestamps checked, and with every passing minute, a realization settled deeper in his chest. There were hundreds of people who worked in his buildings at night, people whose faces he had never seen and names he had never learned. Elena's name appeared on a screen, clocked in, but never clocked out. No alert, no follow-up, no one noticed she was missing. And for the first time Thomas understood how invisible someone could be inside a system he had built. Inside the house, the warmth surrounded them, fire crackled and blankets were piled high. Thomas knelt beside her as she sipped warm cocoa with trembling hands. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Maya," she whispered. "And your mom?" "Alina," Maya said, her voice breaking. "She didn't come home." Calls were made and records pulled. And for the first time, Thomas realized how many people worked for him whose names he'd never learned. Alina hadn't clocked out and no one noticed. They found her collapsed in a small staff room tucked away at the back of the building. A place no one visited unless they had to. Alina lay alone on the cold floor beside a row of lockers, her body finally giving in after being pushed far past its limits. Her skin pale and her breathing shallow. For one terrifying moment, Thomas feared they were too late. Then he felt it. A faint pulse. She was alive. Barely. Without waiting, he lifted her into his arms. Shocked by how light she felt, how fragile exhaustion had made her, he carried her himself through the long corridors and out into the waiting vehicle, refusing to hand her off. At the hospital, the truth came quickly and without mercy. Exhaustion, dehydration, low blood sugar. Her body had simply shut down. The doctors explained she had been working consecutive double shifts for weeks, sometimes without real rest, doing it not by choice but to survive, to keep a roof over her child's head. That night Thomas sat alone in a hard hospital chair, the room quiet except for the steady rhythm of monitors, watching Maya sleep curled against her mother's arm like she was afraid to let go. And in that still moment something settled deep inside him, something no boardroom meeting or quarterly report had ever taught him. He realized he hadn't been seeing people at all, only systems, schedules, and numbers. And the cost of that blindness was lying right in front of him. Things changed quickly after that, faster than Alina ever believed possible. Almost unreal in how suddenly the weight began to lift. Hospital bills were covered quietly without questions or explanations demanded, the kind of help that didn't come with shame attached. Rent was paid before overdue notices could arrive or panic could take hold. And then came the offer that made Alina sit down and breathe for the first time in months. A new role, one that existed in daylight, with steady hours, real benefits, and something she had never been given before. Dignity, no more choosing between rest and survival. No more fear that one missed shift could undo everything. Behind closed doors, policies were rewritten from the ground up, contracts reviewed carefully, hours capped, safeguards put in place, not as a performance or public apology, but as a correction long overdue. Because no one should have to work themselves to collapse just to keep their child fed. And no system should be built on people breaking quietly in the background. Weeks later, Maya returned to the Ridge House, not carried in frozen and frightened, but walking through the gates on her own. The place felt different now. Smaller somehow, less intimidating than it had been that morning in the storm. She wore a yellow hoodie that stood out against the gray stone walls. Her cheeks were warm, her hands steady, her steps confident. She wasn't shivering anymore. She wasn't scared. She was safe. Thomas noticed her immediately and did what had become second nature to him. He lowered himself to her level instead of towering above her, meeting her eyes with patience and care, and asked her gently if she knew why she was brave. Maya thought for a moment, rocking slightly on her heels, then shrugged like the answer was simple. "Because I didn't stop walking," she said. Thomas smiled, not the polished smile he used in boardrooms, but a quiet one filled with understanding. "Yes," he said softly, "and because you taught me how to see, how to notice the people I once walked past, how to understand what really matters. This isn't a story about wealth, or power, or the kind of success people admire from a distance. It's a story about blindness, the quiet kind, the kind that grows slowly until you don't even realize it's there. The blindness that comes from being busy, from focusing on systems and schedules and numbers, while the people holding everything together fade into the background. It's about how easy it is to walk past lives without ever truly seeing them, to benefit from their sacrifices without knowing their names, to assume everything is fine because nothing has ever forced you to look closer. It's a story about how the world doesn't collapse all at once, but in small invisible ways. When exhaustion is normalized, when struggle is ignored, when people are expected to endure silently, and it's about how that blindness can last a lifetime. Unless something small, something unexpected, steps directly into its path. Sometimes that something is a child. Sometimes it's a 6-year-old girl walking through a storm, too young to understand systems or policies or profit, but old enough to know that her mother didn't come home, old enough to keep walking when everything in her body told her to stop. She didn't set out to change a life, or fix a broken system, or teach a powerful man a lesson. She was just trying to survive. She was just trying to find the person she loved. And yet, in doing so, she became the one who saved everyone. Because courage doesn't always look loud or heroic. It doesn't always come with speeches or applause. Sometimes courage looks like frozen hands that won't stop reaching, tired legs that refuse to give in, A small voice that keeps asking for help when silence would be easier. Sometimes courage doesn't announce itself at all. Sometimes it just keeps walking. And in that quiet persistence, lives are changed, hearts are opened, and people finally learn how to see.